Pre-ordering anime figures is starting to feel pointless, and that's a thought that's been on my mind for about a year or so. So today I'd like to talk about why I feel that way. But before we begin, in case this video just leaves my normal audience, which it might because of the topic on hand, this is focusing on anime scale figures, not Nendoroids, not Figma, not Figuarts, not resin statues. It's very much focused on the stuff that I typically talk about. So in case you don't really agree with me, but you also typically buy other types of figures, that might be why. Now, I think the one thing that we can all agree on if we typically buy scale anime figures is that these figures are really expensive these days. And that's not a shocking thing for me to say. Everybody, whether or not you're new to the community or you've been collecting for a very long time, this is just the most expensive the hobby has ever been. And there's definitely some valid reasons as to why that may be. I mean, the cost of materials have definitely gone up. Shipping is absolutely ridiculous these days. I think that's kind of a killer for a lot of people, just not wanting to spend $50 to $100, God forbid even more than that, just to get the figure you bought that was already really expensive. And I really want to believe that the employees, the people that are actually making and producing these figures, are just getting better salaries rather than the cost of licensing being the reason that these figures are so goddamn expensive these days. But we don't actually have that information, so we can only really just guess. And a lot of people like to talk about the glory days of collecting back in 2012 when figures were $50 to $80 and you could just buy whatever you wanted because everything was so affordable. And as someone who's been collecting since 2011, I can admit things were pretty easygoing back then, and it was nice to just see something and buy it. However, I do think there are plenty of reasons to be more excited about 2023 and not necessarily look back to better days. Because the fact of the matter is that you have so many options these days. You are spoiled for choice. Back then, if you weren't really into the super popular shows or Fate or Miku, then you weren't really gonna be happy with what was coming out because that was really it. You didn't have a lot of options out there unless you got lucky. Nowadays, there's so many companies, there's so many different types of figures being made, and there's just so many more IPs getting representation that I honestly have more fun collecting nowadays, even though it's gonna hurt my wallet a little bit more than it used to. But anyway, let's get back to the main point. Why would you want to pre-order an anime figure in the first place? Well, you want that security, right? You want to make sure that if you see a figure that you absolutely love, a figure that you feel like you just can't live without, then you want to make sure that you're actually going to get it by hitting that pre-order button. Unless you do it on a weird, sketchy website, but hopefully that's not the case. There's a lot of information out there, YouTube videos and guides aplenty just telling you where you should buy those figures from. I don't have a video like that. I can make one if you want, but to get back on track, pre-ordering a figure is gonna guarantee that you get a copy of it. And there's actually a couple of other reasons as to why you might want to pre-order figures, which I'm gonna talk about in a little bit. However, I feel like lately, especially over the past year or so, the figures that I've pre-ordered and then received, I didn't need to pre-order them. They just have not really required me to do so. But not only that, these figures are also rapidly decreasing in price. I'm talking weeks or months after release, they're already way cheaper than what I initially paid for, making me feel kind of stupid. Why did I go out and pre-order these things if I could have saved so much money by waiting a little bit longer? Now, I have a couple of examples I want to talk about because they're going to help me express other opinions that I have in terms of why you might want to still pre-order those figures, but at the same time, they've really dropped in price pretty dramatically in some cases. Now, the first one is Rize from Trials of Mana. This is a figure I reviewed on the channel and one that I featured in my favorite figures of 2022. It's an absolutely beautiful figure. I still recommend it to this day, but it's very niche. People don't really care about Trials of Mana. I'm not sure if my audience has even played that game. It got a remake, but before that remake, there really wasn't an easy way to play that game. It was locked away in Japan, region exclusive, yet it had its audience, right? But this figure, as nice as it is, costing about 17,800 yen, just wasn't going to pull a big audience to pre-order this figure because who the hell cares, right? There are so many figures out there that this beautiful figure just gets overlooked because people don't need it. And I totally understand that. But I wanted to pre-order this figure for a very specific reason. I was trying to support the company and the IP. I wanted to make sure that I was telling Flare, the company that made the figure, that I like what they're doing here. I want them to make more figures. Specifically, I wanted them to make Angela from Trials of Mana because she's my favorite character. And in fact, they are. And I like to believe that I helped contribute to making that figure a reality because, like, how else am I gonna talk to this company? How am I gonna communicate with Flair and tell them, like, hey, I really like this Rias figure that you made, but I really want you to make Angela instead. I'm gonna take out my wallet, I'm gonna pay them for it because I still like it, and then hopefully enough sales happen so that the line continues. So while I don't regret pre-ordering that figure, in fact, like, I really am happy that they're making that Angela figure, I could have also saved about like 8,000 yen because that figure tanked. That figure's like 9,000 yen these days. I'm not saying it's guaranteed these companies are going to make additional figures after they make the first one, but it absolutely helps. It's data collecting. If a figure sells really well, why wouldn't they want to capitalize on that and continue to make more figures from that series? Now, another figure I picked up was Lena Bell Roll. This is an original character and a plus 18 figure. And when you hear plus 18, that's usually a good sign to pre-order the figure because when you think of like Binding, Native, Rocket Boy, I think Frog, there's like Vibrastar, there's a lot of companies out there that make plus 18 figures. But for the most part, a lot of these figures are very difficult to find on the aftermarket. There's just a precedent that if you can take the clothes off of this figure, the price is going through the roof. It just seems to be the case, right? So my dumbass is thinking, all right, I like Michihasu, the artist of Lena Bell. I really like this figure too. Looks great. So I'm gonna pre-order it. Got it day one. Very happy with it. Highly recommend. Again, I like these figures, but it dropped in price to like 12,000 to 15,000 yen on AmiAmi's pre-owned lately. And that is kind of disappointing. I don't normally collect plus 18 figures, so Lena Bell Roll was actually my first one, and I thought I was being smart about it. I would get that pre-order in, and then I wouldn't have to worry about it anymore, and then I'd feel pretty good about things. You know, the figure went up in price, yet I got it for the retail price. Hell yeah. Yet, now I can actually get it for half the price. And I just want to clarify that I don't really care if my collection is worth a lot. You know, like, I'm not really concerned about the aftermarket prices when I own a figure. I just don't want to spend a lot on them. I don't want to have to spend $400 on a Lena Bell Roll if that happened, but I feel stupid when I could have spent $100 on a Lena Bell Roll because she's like 12,000 to 15,000 yen right now. Like, that just doesn't feel good. I pre-ordered the figure because I wanted to, you know, support Michihasu, but I could have saved so much money if I just waited a little bit. That figure has not been out for that long, and yet it's already that cheap, and there's like 5 or so listings on AmiAmi. It just kind of sucks. And then there's other examples like the Ryza figure from Max Factory. I've yet to talk about that one, but I did receive it. That figure cost about 29,000 yen, and yet now you can find it for about 22,000 yen. I don't remember if that figure had discounts, but that's a pretty big difference for only like 2 months. Then there's figures like this Shuten Doji back here, one of my favorite figures of all time. That figure was about 20,000 yen, somewhere between like 19,000 and 22,000 yen, and yet I saw it on the Hobby Search bargain bin sale for about 14,000. Same thing happened with the Asuka Radio Eva 2.0 figure. Very popular, just came out. Why did they already hit the bargain bin? That makes no sense whatsoever, and yet if you didn't pre-order it right away, you could have gotten it for a better deal. So I just feel like this keeps happening over and over and over and over and over again. There's figures like anything from Demon Slayer where people will tell you, don't pre-order it. Why? Because they all hit the bargain bin. For whatever reason, they always hit the bargain bin. You just wait, because there's gonna be extra. There's always extra for Demon Slayer. And I'm sure there's plenty of other examples like that, but I think you kind of get the point at this point. There's a lot of figures that just hit the bargain bin, drop in price immediately, and they're always readily available. I think the problem right now is a matter of like oversaturation. There are so many different companies out there asking for your money, but the figures also cost so much more than they used to that we can't possibly keep up. But the fact is, if you don't live in Japan, then you gotta worry about shipping prices too, which start at like $40 minimum these days, but very often go to like 70, 80, 90, 100, even more than that if you're buying a pretty big figure. You could ship it surface mail, of course, which I do recommend if you're not in a rush to get your figures, but it's also not really insured, so if something goes wrong, you might really lose out on a lot of money, so there are some risks with that. But it just sucks. There are so many times where I've seen figures that I really like and I would love to add to my collection because I find them beautiful or really well sculpted, but I just don't do it at the end of the day because I just don't feel like it's worth the additional like 10,000 to 15,000 yen that they're asking for. And I think a lot of people think that way. There's gotta be a reason that there's just so much extra supply of these figures on the aftermarket, and I think it's gonna hurt these companies in the end. I think stores are probably gonna have to like change their strategy at some point if they just keep these figures in stock all the time. On that note, I did remember something just now that I want to talk about really quickly, and that's canceling pre-orders. Like some stores will let you do it and some won't, but it's a great idea, right? It's a nice feeling when you're not like locked in anymore. Like if you change your mind, for instance, or there's a month where there's just so many things coming out. Keep in mind, a lot of figures get delayed. And there will just be instances where you have to pay for so many figures at one time because these companies didn't actually meet the delivery date. So if you can cancel some figures, then that's a win, right? But you gotta think about it from the store's perspective. By you pre-ordering a figure from them, you're telling them that you are going to be buying it, and in return, they're going to go to the manufacturer and, set an order for how many figures they need for their store. Probably some extra in case like the figure does well or there's some issues where they have to like do some replacements. But it's like a tricky line, right? Like you gotta worry about like yourself, but over canceling figures is definitely a problem that the store is going to have to deal with at some point. I don't really have like a major point to make about all that. I'm just kind of like acknowledging the bigger picture. I'm not here to preach. I'm not here to tell you exactly what to do. But the fact of the matter is that canceling too many pre-orders will eventually hurt the stores, and personally, I don't like doing that. So in conclusion, I feel like collecting anime figures in 2023 is definitely different than what it used to be. The strategy of just pre-ordering any figure whatsoever doesn't really seem like it's to your benefit when 90% of the time or more, you could just pick it up on the aftermarket. And I don't like the idea of not supporting the industry, but it's just so apparent to me that I could be saving so much extra money by just not buying a figure right away. So I'm gonna be changing my strategy a little bit. There will absolutely be figures that I continue to pre-order. If it's a series that I absolutely love, or if it's a limited figure, I'm gonna pre-order it, right? If it's something from the Good Smile Global site that looks pretty big and might have like a really high shipping price, then I'm also gonna pre-order it because I don't wanna worry about like a 10,000 yen shipping fee being tagged on right when it comes out. Rather not worry about that. And there's probably some other types of figures that I will pre-order no matter what. However, I just can't think of them right now because this video is not scripted and it's just not coming to me right now. But for everything else, the so-so figures, the 7 out of 10s, I'm not gonna pre-order them because even if they don't drop in price, I don't necessarily need a deal. I could still find them on the aftermarket for the retail price because that just seems to be the trend. So that's it. That's everything that I wanted to talk about in terms of pre-ordering anime figures in 2023, or at least I hope so. If I forgot to talk about something or you want to add on to this conversation, let me know in the comments down below. And certainly people have been talking about it for a long time, but I don't necessarily see too many videos on it, and I wanted to just like throw my opinion into the ring. I don't know why I did a bat. That would be like hitting whatever. But anyway, thanks for watching. Thanks for 7,000 subscribers, by the way. It really does mean a lot. I'll continue to make videos for you guys, but until next time, I guess I'll just see you around, and I hope you take care. Later.